Hello, everybody. Welcome to this fabulous summer fantasy debut panel. I'm so excited to be joined with these authors and to be chatting about some really fun, amazing books for the summer that you can pick up, pre-order, all the good stuff. My name's Lily. I'm a book reviewer for Utopia State of Mind, and that's kind of where I am all over the internet. And before we get into the author bios and what the books are about, in case you haven't read all of the books, I just wanted to say that here we don't tolerate any harassment of any kind, and that our goal is to create a safe space where everyone can chat about writing and everything they like to do and drink and eat when they write, all the good stuff. And so if we find you engaging in any harassment or hate speech, you will be removed and blocked. So let's just jump into the author bios and about the books so that we can talk about the questions afterwards.
Hi, I'm Gina Chen. I'm the author of Violet Made of Thorns. I actually have books right here. I just got them recently. They're very pretty. They come out in about 2.5 weeks. It is about a prophet who can see the future and also tells lies about them, and the cursed prince she gets entangled with, and the terrible prophecy that binds them together. I did not actually prepare a bio because I always feel very silly talking about my author bio, but I like K-pop and plushes, so you can kind of see that behind me. That's my bio. You can go next.
Okay. Hi, I'm Rachel Menard. I've been writing YA for about 12 years. I've also written a short story that was on the Cast of Wonders podcast. I've written some writing advice in Writer's Digest, and I did self-publish a novel before this, Steel Hand, Cold Heart, that won the 7th annual self-published ebook awards from Writer's Digest. But Game of Strength and Storm is my official traditional debut, and it is a gender-bent Hercules retelling with a fantasy competition.
We're going in a circle here. I'll take over. I'm Emily Theed. I am the debut author of This Vicious Grace, which just came out a week and a half ago. I'm also a former teacher, a former Pitch Wars mentor. I have ADHD, and I accidentally write characters that also do. This Vicious Grace is a romantic YA fantasy about a girl named Alessa who was given the power to protect her island home by channeling a partner's magic. But unfortunately for her, every time she tries to touch one of them, they do not survive the encounter. So people are starting to turn against her. She's not a big fan of the assassination plans that they're working on. So she hires a grumpy outcast named Dante to be her bodyguard, but he has some dark secrets of his own, and they may be the key to helping her figure out her gift or the thing that takes her out once and for all.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Elisa Bonin. I am the author of 2 books coming out this summer. One is called Dauntless, and it comes out on August 2nd. The other, Stolen City. It comes out on September 20, which is technically still summer because it's the day before the official start of fall. So I'm just going to say I have 2 summer books coming out. I do not have them in my hands just yet, so just imagine that this is where I will put my books when they exist. Dauntless is a sapphic Filipino-inspired fantasy. It's about 2 girls who fall in love, but so that they can be together, they have to stop their cultures, take their island back from colonizers. So I grew up in the Philippines. I'm born and raised there, although now I live in Europe. And I really wanted to include some aspect of the Philippines in a fantasy novel. So that's sort of where Dauntless came from. And I'm super excited to be here and really excited to talk about it today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maida, or MT Con, and I recently graduated, so I'm a freshly new full-time author, but I have no idea how long that's going to last, so hopefully it'll last for a little bit. And I am the debut author of Nura and the Immortal Palace, which is currently the Waterstones Book of the Month. So I'm here in the UK right now, just touring for that. And it's about a young girl who works in the mica mines in Pakistan. And one day the mines collapse and her best friend is proclaimed dead. So she goes in the mines to search for him, but ends up through this portal into an enchanting realm of Jinn. So she kind of has to figure out a way to escape and save her best friend.
I'm just so happy. I just got like excited all about the books all over again. I have kind of a chonky question for the very beginning one, just because I felt like agency and choice were huge themes in like all of the books. Kind of like this struggle to have our own agency and to kind of realize what that means for us and our future and yada yada. I wanted to know a few things. So if I if I need to repeat the question later, let me know, because I do know that there are like a few different parts to it. The first one is if you could talk about what agency and choice means to your characters in the book. And so how does it, in case someone hasn't read it, like how does their relationship to agency begin at the very beginning of the book? And so why do you think that agency is such a universal theme in like books in general, but also in like YA books? So as I said, it's a big question. So if I need to repeat any of it, let me know.
Should I start? Okay, cool. So I think the fun thing about Violet's character is that she can see the future and somewhat talk to the gods in charge of destiny even. So she is told from the very beginning that the prince, the love interest, and maybe her enemy must die, and that her role in that will be fixed one way or another. And Violet's like, no, I don't care what the gods say. I have a choice in this. That pretty much happens in the first chapter. Violet really hates being defined by other people, and is like the most prominent characteristic about her that comes up time and time again. So to have these gods telling her who she is and what she will be, that really grates her. And she will literally try to defy prophecy just to prove a point, just to say, haha, take that. And also avoid being complicit in murder, I guess. And that's not the only figure in her life that's also placing these like unwanted expectations on her. Everyone from the king to the prince is trying to define her for their own reasons. And I feel like that's quintessentially like what growing up feels like. No matter if you're in a fantasy book or a contemporary book, this is like your coming of age. The people who raise you or grow up with you can place all these expectations on you. And maybe you feel beholden to them, maybe you feel trapped by them, and maybe you feel like your future is already decided because of them, because of the way you were raised. And society places expectations on you based on how you look, based on your job, and that they also look at her a certain way because of how she looks and what her job is, and how she chooses to go about her job. I think it was really fun to play with this in a fairy tale environment, because in a fairy tale you have these strict roles. You have these like this prince, the witch, the hero, the villain. So Violet is just kind of dealing with that in a fantasy environment. I think it's just very quintessentially coming of age, but it's just heightened with all these specific fairy tale labels. That's what her journey is all about.
Yeah, so in Game of Strength and Storm, that is basically the plot, is their agency. All three of my characters have been set with a certain destiny that they're fighting to change. So it begins with Jen going to see the empresses of her kingdom called Olympia. She's been chosen for a lottery where she gets one wish, and her wish is to free her father from prison. He was jailed for murders she doesn't believe he committed, but since he was jailed, that damaged, their entire reputation. They used to be famous and now they're not. So she's kind of hated for having the magical ability she does have to like mind control animals and creatures with blood, spit, or hair. So I won't get into too much of that. But so her first choice is she walks in there deciding she is going to change her fate, change their reputation by doing whatever the empresses ask to get her wish. And it just turns out that the wish is the task she has to do is much harder. She has to defeat the 10 laborers, but she makes a choice because she knows what it has been like to live as an outcast and hated. And so facing these dangers to her seems like the only choice she can make. It's either go forward or go back, and she doesn't want to go back. For Castor, my other main character, she lives on like an island with a patriarchal succession, and she feels she is the more qualified person to take over the helm. So she's going to the Empresses to ask for them to change the, succession rules so she can rule the island. And she sounds a lot like Violet, where she's going to change her destiny no matter what, what it takes or costs or who she has to hurt or burn to do it. For your second part of the question, when I was thinking about it, I think especially in YA, like I remember being a teenager, and it's when you become a teenager, it's kind of the first time you're allowed to make decisions for your own. Your parents have kind of been making your decisions, your teachers, and now you're thrust into the world and you're making your own choices, especially in fantasy where we like to remove the parents entirely by murdering them, or in my case, I put them in prison. So Jen's kind of on her own, and Castor is defying her parents. She has parents, but she's completely defying them. And so I think that's what creates, why we do it so much in YA, because that age is just when you start making your own choices.
Yeah. So in my book, Alessa has been given this incredible power, but she didn't want this power. She didn't want this role in life. So she has very much been thrust into it. She is a reluctant hero. And in the giant accidental metaphor for undiagnosed ADHD that is my book, she is trying to do things the way that other people have done them successfully in the past, and she does not understand why it's not working. She's trying to please people. She is trying to be the perfect savior. She's been told for the past 5 years that the gods chose her for a reason, and yet so far she's the worst savior that has ever lived. And her first act of agency is when she chooses that she doesn't think she is the failure that everyone else thinks she is. In the beginning of the story, we meet her and she's really feeling like she can't do anything right. But once people start to turn against her and she realizes her life is in danger, she makes a decision that she doesn't want to give up that easily. Not just because it would mean dying, but because there must be a reason why she was put in this position. And her first real decision is to go out and find a bodyguard of her own, because she doesn't trust the guards in her, that are surrounding her. And that act of agency changes everything in her life from that point forward. And some for the better, some for the worse. And I think for me and for so many young people, adolescence is the time where you are starting to step away from your parents and all the mentors in your life and have to make decisions for yourself. And a lot of times agency comes with mistakes and comes with consequences. But that is what is so exciting and so heightened about being a teenager, which I personally think is why so many of us like to write these characters, because everything is turned up. Your first love, your first huge failure, your first time stepping out of your comfort zone. And all of that requires agency. And I think even people and even characters who don't think that they have a lot of agency have more than they realize, because it's just at that point in your life, you no longer can just be carried along by the tide. You're going to have to make decisions, even if that decision is to not speak up or to not take the brave move. That's still a decision. And I think it's wonderful to explore and let these characters explore, again, I write fantasy. So sort of the escalated worst case scenarios of every possible decision you could make. If you're going to fall in love, it should be with the worst possible person. If you're going to attempt something new, it should have the most dangerous consequences. And I think that gives all readers a safe place to explore what it is like to really push the boundaries of your agency, because it's in a book and it's not your real life. And therefore, if things go tragically wrong, you can, as a reader, can step back and, still root for the characters in the end.
Yeah. So Sari in Dauntless starts the book basically following, going with the flow and trying to find a new path for herself, but she's sort of just letting everyone tell her what to do at the start. She makes one big decision, which is that she can't stay in her hometown anymore because of reasons you'll have to read the book to find out. But when she gets to her new place, she starts off basically not sure what she's going to do and content to let other people tell her what to do. But over the course of the book, Sari's character develops to the point where she starts realizing that she doesn't always agree with her mentors and with the people around her. And by the end of the book, she grows into her own and finds her own path forward and decides to make choices that haven't been made by her mentors or really by anybody in her culture. So she's forging a new path all of her own. And I think that I'm not really going to belabor the point about YA, but I think that this is the age, like everyone has said, where people start making those choices. Sari's the same age I was when I moved to the US, and I didn't choose to move. I was like Sari, I was kind of pushed out and kind of made to do this thing. But along the way, I discovered that I could make different choices from the people around me. I think that the adolescent years are super important because that's when you start to come into your own. That's when you start to find yourself as a person. And it's just so much fun to write. So I think that that's the reason why we like to write YA and we like to read YA, is because we can explore these interactions and this very special time of life and this relationship with agency.
Yeah, I loved those answers as well. For my main character, Nura, specifically, I feel like her situation demands a lot more agency than most others would, because Nura comes from a really, really poor background. And because she works as a mica miner, she's basically, risking her life every single day just for, a few tiny pieces of dollars. And if she doesn't make her own changes in her life, she is basically going to spend the rest of her life doing that same thing. She's going to be, in the same situation. She's going to continue to be poor and continue to live, that really dangerous life. So if she doesn't, step up and make those smart decisions and work super hard, she won't be able to change her situation. So she really can't be passive. And just like everyone else has said, when you're growing up, a lot of the decisions you make can be like life changing, in a sense where for Nura specifically, if she can get out of that situation, if she can remove herself from child labor and really earn a better lifestyle through her actions, through becoming or through having more agency, then that would change her life. And so with me, I was really trying to tell teens that a lot of the action you do, or a lot of the things that you happen to do in your childhood or in your teens, can actually, make a huge difference, even if it seems like it doesn't. So, and I think we see that a lot, whether it be contemporary or if it's in fantasy, that this is the first time that they're making these, huge, big decisions. And we can see that ripple effect happen in the story. So I think that, that's why a lot of people tend to gravitate towards children's books.
Yeah, and I love also what you were saying as well about how it can start in childhood too, because Nora is middle grade. I know that as well in my mind, but I forgot necessarily to say that. But I love how that's one of the reasons why I love that book as well, is that like you can see that these conflicts and these struggles are like they transcend kind of a strict definitive age group, and how like they kind of all of these struggles and these choices that people are forced to make and choices that they choose to make are like all sort of connecting in with each other and within the themes of the books. My next question was about discoveries, because I feel like there are a lot of plot twists in all of these books. And so I wanted to know how you balance pacing and tension within the drafting process. And also in general, if you feel like one part of the writing, so like, I don't know, maybe like characters, pacing, world building, atmosphere, one of those elements come easier or like more difficult to you in general. Because I feel like as someone who is not a writer, all of that just sounds really hard. So.
For me, I think this always changes. I think baseline, I'm definitely a character-driven writer. I like to write about relationships and getting into those messy interior thoughts, and then everything else is more to support that. But the way my brain works, I think of my story in layers when I write a little more. I think it's okay to not have everything figured out at once. I'm someone who actually likes to revise a lot because I don't have everything out there at once. It is a lot of stuff to think about, like characters, action pacing, and when to put everything. And you just end up moving everything anyway by the time you get to the second, third draft. So yeah, it's okay that you can't multitask. If you're a writer out there having trouble with this, you will revise it anyway. And I think it really isn't until I reread it a few times that I go, oh yeah, this is what I was trying to do with the scene. And I also never really stick to one process either. I know people have their processes that they really like, but I think every project is just a little different. And then also the time and place when I'm writing it is a little different. And it's totally okay to just not have a process also.
Yeah, I'm a lot like Gina, and I do a lot of rewrites. So my first draft, I usually just get down what happens. I call them like glorified outlines because it's basically just the plot. I have the chapters, everything that's going to happen. And then in my second draft, I have to think a little bit more about why this character makes this choice and what their motivation was and why they did it. And so my drafts are always like underwritten. And another thing, so I'm good at getting plot and like the action scenes down. And if you read it through, it'd be really fast paced and not good. And then later I have to go in and add like the descriptions too. Like my agent had to remind me, like, do they eat, because I just go from one thing to the next. And then I have to add in all the scenes of them like eating and getting dressed. So I have to work hard on getting those descriptions in. And that's something I have to focus on personally. So everyone's different though.
Sorry, I think I missed part of this question. I just discovered what I'm allergic to. Good timing, great. Sorry. So, but I think we were talking about how do we balance pacing and tension? Was that this? Okay. So I actually think that pacing and tension are completely inextricably linked together. And so I use them in order to support each other. So one of the main things that I had to do when I was revising This Vicious Grace was my wonderful agent, before we went on submission, kept saying, this is all great, but can we get this sooner? Can we get this sooner? Can we get this sooner? Can we get to this faster? To the point where I was like, I'm pretty sure if you like push all the water to one end of a bathtub, like it just flows back out. Like everything can't be sooner. Like that's not possible. But it was a challenge to me. And we've all heard about, killing your darlings, how you're supposed to cut the stuff that you love if it doesn't serve the story. But I'm such a character-based and relationship-based writer that I wasn't willing to give up those character moments to serve the plot. So what I ended up having to do was take these long stretches of dialogue that I loved so much, chop them into little pieces and spread them out through other scenes that served other purposes. So by having each scene serve as many purposes as possible and not having these like long chunks of dialogue where characters were just sitting around talking, but instead they were talking while they were training for something or while they were exploring something. That way it increased the tension in all of those scenes because suddenly you have interpersonal tension and you have external tensions. And that way it kept the pacing feeling faster. One of my absolute favorite compliments is when people can't believe that my book is as long as it is because it felt so fast. And it's a 440 something page book. And yet I hear from readers all the time already that they read it in one night, that they read it in one sitting. And I figure that as a writer, that means that I did something effectively because I was able to hook them long enough that they didn't realize how many pages they had to read. So it's a fun challenge.
Yeah, this is hard, and I'm still working out how I do this as well. I'm on the same team as Gina and Rachel. I don't try and get it all perfect in the first draft. I think I would never finish anything if I was trying to do it right the first time. So my first drafts are just figuring out what happens. I love to imagine fantastical worlds and I love to imagine the characters that live in it. So I basically start with the characters and setting. And for my current 2 books that are out, I started with the characters, their goals, and the setting. And I essentially pants these books. So I just would sit down and write every day and think to myself, what's the most exciting thing that's going to happen right now? And for Dauntless, the first part was actually really easy because I knew I wanted to get them out of the known world, basically out of their environment and on an adventure. So that part I had a lot of fun writing. But once I got them out, I had to sit there, and that's when I had to start outlining because I realized I had to figure out what they were actually going to do there and what they were going to find. So I think that the first draft of Dauntless needed a lot of cleaning up, but it was a lot of fun for me to write. And later on, I was able to go back and foreshadow some things that I kind of just threw into the story at the last minute and weave them into the plot. I think the nice thing about writing books is that we have many chances to get it right before we send them out we send them out and before other people read them. So I just like to go over my books several times before I let anybody else read them. And then hopefully at the end, what I have is something that looks intentional.
So I think I'm one of those writers that do a lot of work before I write my first draft. So I love researching. Like, I think researching is probably my favorite part of the whole writing process because I can spend months going down rabbit holes, finding one term in a textbook and then searching that term up on Wikipedia and then going through the Wikipedia page and finding like 50 other terms that I'm interested in. So I don't have the best time management when it comes to writing, but once I'm finished with my research, or once I'm satisfied with my research, I'll make an outline. And then I'm one of those people that really like to do a clean draft. So I'm like kind of the opposite, where I want to make everything perfect on the first draft, or at least semi-perfect, something that, I will feel like I don't need to revise a lot. So how I do that is I sort of write an outline and I'll rewrite the outline probably like 10, 15 times to make sure it makes sense, to make sure I like the plot twists, the character arcs. And then once I have an outline I'm kind of satisfied with, I'll go in and write the first draft, but there's no guarantee that it's even remotely perfect. A lot of times I veer off my outlines as well. So there's still a lot of revision that gets involved. But for when it comes to tension and pacing, for me, tension is the most fun to write. Like, when it comes to relationship dynamics, plot twists, exposing juicy character motivations, like there's just so much that can happen. And I think for me, I like to think about those, really big plot points or points of tension, and then sort of like fill in the dots, fill in the story about, how character A gets to, the first juicy plot point, and then how the characters get to the second one. So it's really much like connecting the dots for me.
Yeah, I don't write ever, but I definitely empathize with the idea of like heavy outlines beforehand. I feel like when I was a kid, I was recently going through some stuff and I found these like pages of family trees for my Sims characters where I'd be like, okay, this is like their profession. This is how they like met this person, whatever. And then like they're never played, right? It's just drafting these trees and then nothing ever happens with them. It's like, great. I feel like I did enough work for today. I'm done, right? I want to talk a little bit now about some of the books in depth because I feel like there were some really interesting similarities that they had. So the first pairing I thought about was for This Vicious Grace and Violet Made of Thorns, because I feel like both of your books navigate like what it means to see yourself and to be perceived as like monstrous, whatever that means to, everyone around. And so I wanted to know if you could talk about the connections between this perception of monstrosity and your characters in the books. Oh yeah, Emily, do you want to start?
Sure. I love this actually because I've heard this a lot. I haven't had a chance to read Gina's book yet, but I've heard a number of people have compared them in similar ways. And so much of my story is not just about Alessa, but it's about Dante as well. And there are two characters that both think that they are monstrous or cursed in different ways. And a lot of their journey throughout the story is kind of the fact that they see this similarity in each other. They're in very different positions. She is a chosen savior. She is revered. But at the same time, she has been causing a lot of damage and people are really afraid for their safety because of her. So as someone who is not very intimidating a person, somehow she has become this creature in a way that is dangerous to other people. And she doesn't know how to handle that because that's not necessarily who she feels like she is as a person. Whereas Dante as a character does think of himself as someone who is dangerous, who is, evil or an outcast, that people should fear him and should dislike him. And yet I think it comes clear pretty quickly that he's got a lot more going on beneath that, and he's a lot more caring than maybe he even realizes he is. But the only way that they each can learn to see themselves authentically is almost by seeing themselves reflected in someone else. And so I really enjoyed exploring that and exploring how other people perceive you and how society perceives you changes how you feel about yourself, and the sort of empowerment that can come when you take back ownership of who it is that you are and define yourself based on what you think about yourself, not other people.
So I always think it's really interesting that a lot of people talk about anti-heroines as if they were always villains and monsters. Because actually, when I think about like anti-heroes, I think of like Batman, who is arguably more of a hero-leaning kind of person. So I think of them as heroes who struggle with being a hero because either they don't believe that they're capable of it, or if they don't believe like the world is worthy of it. And whatever they need to save is worth saving, and that's kind of more of Violet's whole deal. And I think that Violet is haunted by the fact that she could very easily choose to be a monster. I don't think she necessarily wants to be a monster, but she could like, this is the easy route. I could do it, and I have a lot to gain from it. And I think if she actually truly in her heart wanted to be a monster, her choices would be much easier, and then we wouldn't have a book to write about it all. So I've always been a little annoyed about the girl bossification of strong female characters, where whenever said character turns like monstrous or violent, it always seems to be framed as this like better choice that makes them stronger or gives them more agency. When no, you have to factor in what they're defying and what the character actually wants. So for Violet, becoming a monster is the easy choice. It's easy to be evil. And it would be also letting the gods win that she really wanted to defy earlier. But at the same time, her selfishness is, her weapon. It gives her agency and power in the court. It does. So she has to indulge in that once in a while. And she is proud of indulging that in order to survive. But that's a tightrope she's on, right? So like if she goes too much one way, what's going to happen to her? And ultimately, does she have to become a monster in order to survive?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about in the books as well. It's like monstrosity being like so relative to whatever that is, and like all the ways that it's kind of like weaponized as well in different ways against or for people. So the question as well, I had for Game of Strength and Storm and Dauntless, both of your books kind of play a little bit with this like perceptions. So I said perceptions, but I think perspective is what I meant. Perspectives and also knowledge. So basically, like if someone knows something and they're not telling someone else, you like secrets. I guess so. Secrets and perceptive. Why am I struggling with this? Different like POVs. That's what I mean to say. Whatever POV stands for. So I wanted to know, how did you balance working with multiple perspectives or seeing through multiple characters? And the balance of like what one character knows but isn't telling the other person, or like how you balance when characters are hiding other things from other people.
So this is what I really enjoy about drafting. Like I enjoy having characters that I start the book with, and I give them all different goals, and I give them different knowledge. And then I spend the entire book basically throwing them together and seeing what conflicts spark from that, and seeing how we can get character A to give up what they know to character B, and so on and so forth. So Dauntless is a multi-POV book. It has 3 point of view characters. The first point of view is Sari. She's the main protagonist. The second point of view is Eshai, Sari's mentor. And the third point of view is Sana, Sari's love interest. And all 3 of them know something different about the world. All 3 of them occupy different roles in the world. Obviously, Sari, she's the protagonist, so I really wanted her perspective to be the most important one in the entire book. Like most of the book is her point of view. So wherever possible, I used Sari's point of view. But I also wanted to show, because Sari was coming in as kind of a beginner, into this world of adventure and high stakes and battle. I also wanted to show what the world looks like from somebody who is more experienced with the world, and sort of I play a lot of video games, so when you have the higher level character who joins your party for a little bit, that's Eshai. So whenever I needed to show something about the inner workings of the society or politics, or I just wanted to show what you can actually do with the powers that Sari is learning to master, I would shift perspective to Eshai. Sana's point of view I use sparingly because she has a very, very different perspective from everybody else. And if I used her point of view too much, it would actually spoil most of the book before we get to where it would be good for everybody to have this information. But I use her point of view when I'm trying to show what the other side is doing, and also when I'm trying to further her character arc. So when all three characters are together, I use Sari whenever possible because she's the protagonist. But if any character in the three of them is having like a big emotional moment, then I switch to their point of view so that they can have their moment in a way that other people can see. As for how I balance it, it's just that what would be most, it's the same question that I ask myself when I'm drafting, like what would be most interesting right now? And that's the point of view that I write from and the information that I give. So, yeah.
So for going back to how I do multiple drafts, Game of Strength and Storm was very different on the first draft. I had written it all from Jen's perspective. It was set in space with flying space whales. And I just did a straight up Hercules retelling where she was going from labor to labor, doing them all on her own. And it was incredibly boring. So I was like, I need to jazz this up. So I gave her a competitor, Castor, who was actually based on a friend of Hercules in the original, Iolaus, who helped with the labors, but I made her a kind of antagonist to Jen. And then later I added in Pollux. So he's like my tertiary character, just kind of to have this different perspective. So Jen is my lead. She's my Hercules stand-in. And then came Castor as her competitor. As far as keeping the voices distinct, I think having written it all from Jen and then switching some of the chapters over, like I kind of added in Castor like much later as a second person. So I didn't have Jen's voice in my head, which made it very easy to keep them distinct. And it's writing there, how they keep secrets. What I liked most about it is I just kept in my mind, the villain is the hero in their own story. So in Castor's story, she's the hero and Jen's the villain. In Jen's story, she's the hero and Castor's the villain. And then Pollux is kind of thrown in the middle because he wants to protect his twin sister Castor, but he's also in love with Jen and wants to help her win. So he's kind of battling that with the expectations of his family, and what he truly wants is his freedom to play his music and be with Jen. As far as deciding who would be each chapter, I also went by another adage, like whoever, kind of what Elisa said, whoever has the most to gain or lose in that scene should be the one narrating, because it's going to be the most interesting and exciting. In edits, there was one chapter my agent changed because they were going to an island that Jen had been to before, and I had her narrating. And she said, well, Pollux has never been to this island, so it's kind of nice to see it through fresh eyes. I agreed with her, so there is one chapter that you'll notice if you read it that I rewrote. So that's another tip. If someone's new to the situation, or, like what Elisa said too, I think it's great if you have someone who's experienced the situation. So you'd have to try either way to do that. And I think, did I answer all parts of your question? Okay, thanks.
I feel like afterwards I need to know a little bit more about the space whales. I feel like after expect something from me, some questions. Just a reminder as well that if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. There's already a bunch and they look really really some of them are longer, but some of them are really funny. So if anyone else has any questions, drop them in the chat. Next, I want to talk about Nora and the Immortal Palace, because I felt like one of the things that I loved so much about your book is this core of friendship, and specifically like the friendship drama and conflicts that you explore and that are sort of given like center stage, if that's how anyone would describe it. Maybe that's not how the right way to describe it, but anyway, I wanted to know how you approach friendship drama and friendship relationships, and also creating dynamic side characters, because that's the other thing, right? I felt like the side characters in Nora were so lovable and like complex at the same time.
Sure. So, yeah, there's a lot of sort of like friendship drama that happens in Nura. And I think, fights that happen with your friends can sometimes even impact deeper in a story, because the bonds that come from friendship can come, from years, right? And that's the case with Nura and Fezl. They've been friends since they were 6 years old. Now they're 12, so it's been 6 years, and they practically grew up with each other, raised each other, and that sort of drama really comes when you're out of your routine. You get pushed out of your day-to-day life, and for Nura and Fezl, that's specifically them getting pushed into this treacherous realm and having to put up with the challenges there. So when you're sort of whisked away into a different situation, you kind of see new sides of yourself and new sides of your friends that you would have never expected before. And it can come with a lot of hesitancies, annoyances. If you see your friend making a decision you don't really agree with, or if your morals are put to the test and you and your friend disagree with something, then it can sometimes really break up those years and those bonds that you guys have together. And so what I did is I really played around with their history and just how much they really knew about each other. So even when they did get into a fight, it's like Nura and Fezl both tried to respect each other in some kind of way, because they know what ticks each other off. They know what they joy, what they like, how an apology would feel to the other person. So it was really much playing up that friendship drama, because I think that's a really interesting way to add tension. And when it comes to creating dynamic side characters, I think the really important aspect of that is just to make them memorable, because we have, you see side characters for a short period of time. You don't really go in too deep with side characters. Some of them don't even have their own character arcs. So what I really like to do is make them memorable in a way such as, giving them an interesting quirk, or adding, a really odd obsession, or making them have a strange opinion. One of my favorite side characters is the Boiler Man from Spirited Away. So Spirited Away is actually one of the Studio Ghibli films that inspired my book Nura and the Immortal Palace. And I just really, really liked this grumpy old man with 6 or 8 arms, I forgot. But he was just he was initially annoyed with this like 12-year-old girl who shows up wanting a job, but he just has this heart of gold. He has a really cool character design, and we don't see much of him. We don't see a lot of him, but he just makes this really big impact in the story. So I think, side characters, even though we don't see them a lot, can, really, really make a story feel more full and feel more enjoyable.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about the tension. I feel like a quality of a really good book is that they have like different levels of stakes, like personal stakes, large world stakes, like different levels of like what's going wrong, I guess, in their lives, and sort of what is personally they're invested in. We have a lot of questions. So I'm going to just kind of pick some that I think are an easy mix of like shorter ones and longer ones. I am going to drop the giveaway link as well. So I'm going to drop that, and then we're going to chat about these questions. The first one I saw that I thought was really interesting was, what are some books that you consider that built your writing style or created the voice or vision that drive your books?
I have a go-to answer. Mine is always "This Savage Song" by Victoria Schwab. I read that book for the first time at a point when I was trying very hard to write in first person present tense because I thought that was what YA had to be. And when I started reading that book, one, it just everything felt right about the voice, and I realized that I could create a voice for characters that was written in this third person past tense that felt just as close, if not even closer, than my first person present tense did. And also, I think thematically, that book talks a lot about what makes a monster, what makes a person. And I think that that has kind of infused my writing ever since. So, formative book for me.
Um, so when I'm thinking about my formative books, I think about the Enchanted Forest Chronicles, and I feel like that has like it's like a middle grade book by Patricia Reed, and it's like about this princess who gets kidnapped by a dragon, and but they become friends, and it's very funny. And I think I've always wanted to write like a little funny, a little quirky books ever since. I also love Terry Pratchett for the same reason. Violet is not as funny as those books, I think, but I think there's like a thread of humor throughout her narration that is really strongly influenced by these books that I read. I also love Tamora Pierce, who's also quite funny. So, yeah.
Yeah, like Emily, one of my formative books was A Gathering of Shadows by V.E. Schwab. So that was a multi-POV, like third person. So I did reference that one a lot in writing this. And Cassandra Clare, like The Mortal Instruments is always a favorite. And I like that too, because it did have a little humor mixed in with the fantasy. I'm also a huge fan of Maggie Stiefvater and Laini Taylor. What's the one with Strange the Dreamer? So that was like one of my favorite all-time books, and another one that was in third person. And I really just love the world building on that one.
I grew up in epic fantasy. So if there's a big doorstop fantasy novel that you're thinking of, or a big doorstop fantasy series, I have either read it or tried to read it or put it on my to read list at some point. Those are the books that I devoured as a kid. I was always having adventures in Fantasyland in my head. And so when I wanted to sit there and write Dauntless, I wanted to write a book that was like that, but that had Filipino characters like in the front seat. So going out and having an adventure, saving the world and fighting epic battles that was my bread and butter growing up. Yeah.
I want to mention not a book, but like just anime in general. I watched a lot of anime in like middle school, and they're just that anime is just so much fun, and there's so much drama, and they have such a good way of balancing humor with seriousness while also being just so action packed. And I like to include a lot of those different things in my stories as well. And I think, with anime, a lot of the times it can be comedic and, still be taken as like a serious piece of work. And that's what I kind of hope, publishing sort of pushes as well, where, you can have these stories that are like really quirky, really funny, really strange, but then, also have these really meaningful moments and, really distinguishing stories and characters. And so when I watched a lot of anime when I was a kid, that's kind of the vibe or the aesthetic that I like to include in my stories as well.
I have to second the anime also. Maida's over here. I forgot about that, but that is also a huge influence on me, and it has influenced some of my books. So if you like the sapphic themes in Dauntless, please thank Yuri on Ice. And if you like Eshai and Seri's mentor-mentee relationship, please thank All Might and Deku, because that's where that came from.
So the next question we have was, which character was the hardest or easiest to write and why?
So for me, I think Violet is the easiest character, right? Because I think it's just once you get into her head, or at least I get into her head. I just keep writing because her voice is pretty similar to a version of my teenage voice, I feel. At the same time, she is also quite difficult to write when she is really, really frustrating with her emotions. I think the most difficult characters to write are the ones who have to actually scheme, and therefore you have to be smarter than them to figure out what they're scheming and also how to mess up their scheme possibly for the sake of plot.
I don't know if I should admit this, but I find writing the scheming characters easier. So for me, it was like the opposite. I could write Castor because she was always scheming and she was kind of predictable in how she would be. But for Jen, she's my hero, and she does have some of her conflicts and breaking points. I had trouble making her not be a Mary Sue or too nice, where that she felt a little bland. So I wanted her to be nice and good at heart, but also have her mistakes. And I actually found that more difficult to temper that together than just making someone like a mean girl,
I'd say it's kind of a combination question and answer for me. And apologize, this is not my greatest performance ever, everyone. I'm in mid allergy attack, so apologies. But I think once I stopped feeling guilty about the fact that Alessa was a lot like me, then she was very easy to write. As authors were told, whatever you do, don't let a character be a self-insert, and she's not. But I think the first few books that I tried to write, I tried so hard to write characters that were different than me that it took a while of giving myself permission to let her have some of my qualities and quirks. And once I did that, it was very easy to create her character the rest of the way. Dante is a very difficult character to write, not because of the character itself, but because he doesn't speak much. He's not much of a talker. And trying to create a love story and create a character that readers would fall in love with when he's not a character who has a point of view, but he is a character that you need to get to know, and he doesn't talk much, is really challenging. I like to think of some of my favorite characters, and they kind of have that archetype in movies and TV shows. X-Men's Wolverine, The Witcher. They're great characters, and they work beautifully on screen because there are actors who can use their facial expressions, and you get to see other characters playing off them. And it kind of wasn't until I got deep into this book that I realized, oh, I don't have an actor who can do this for me. I have to write it myself, and it has to be with words, and he doesn't use a lot of words. So it was really challenging, but it was a really fun challenge because I had to figure out how to convey a whole lot with minor facial expressions, with body movements, with, by putting pauses in the dialogue in just the right spot. But I'm really proud of how it turned out. And somehow, even though he doesn't say much and he doesn't want people to love him, I think so far readers have responded really well.
Yeah, I have to say the same thing about love interests who don't talk much. So Sari was the easiest character for me to write. She was the protagonist, and so she's the first character that I came up with, and her journey, which is basically like teaching a cinnamon roll to kill, is a lot of that was a lot of fun. Sana was harder. She's very closed off for a lot of reasons, and figuring out her motivations, figuring out how to portray those in a believable way, and figuring out how to still have this love story in a way that made sense and in the way that readers would be invested in was a lot harder to do because even in her own POV, she doesn't talk much. So I had to really push to get her to express herself more and to get out there. So.
For me, my easiest character to write was definitely Nura, because I think Nura is very much who I was when I was 12 years old. So, she's stubborn, she's fearless, she's strong-willed. I don't know where those qualities of mine went, but all the decisions that she makes, I'm very much thinking, oh, what would I do? Or what would I have done if I was Nura? And so that kind of personality was very much me when I was her age. And, on the other side, the hardest character for me to write was the craftsman, who is basically like this adult supervisor, Jin, who is supposed to be, this very mature father figure. And I am clearly just not mature enough to, figure out like all the, wise words of wisdom he would have said. So, I had to really sort of like age myself up and think like a grandpa to really figure out, what would this guy say? So, he took just a little bit longer to, write his dialogue, write his quirks.
I agree. I feel like we should channel like who we were a little bit more as kids. I feel like that is so insightful. I feel like sometimes you have all these things like before the world really like gets at you, that you just like intrinsically know, and then you just lose that knowledge, right? You like forget how to love yourself. You forget how to like do all this stuff. That's like bringing like the feels straight into my face. The last question that I think we have time for today, and I think the one that made me laugh when I read it was, um, if your main character met the last character you either read about or watched, what would they think of them? I don't know if you have to. It didn't say if you have to like tell us what the last character was, but I was like, I think that made me laugh when I read that question.
So, if it's okay if I jump in, I to calm myself down before going on this panel, I watched one episode of Baymax on Disney Plus. So you guys could now all imagine Sari meeting Baymax. I think Sari doesn't live in a world with technology, plastic, or balloons. Or I think she would initially be very confused and maybe her guard would be up. But I think that if anybody is capable of making somebody drop their guard, it's Baymax. So I think that eventually they would end up having a conversation that would leave Sari feeling a little bit confused, but maybe a little affectionate towards this strange creature.
So I guess
I can go. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
No, you go.
Okay. The book that I'm reading now, because my book just came out, so I'm going for things that are light and funny and different. So I have been reading Four Aunties and a Wedding by Jessie Sutanto, and the main character is Medi, who is charming and kind of accident disaster prone and flighty and talkative. So honestly, if my characters met her, Alessa would be like, "Hey, new bestie," and Dante would be like, "Oh God, there's two of them now."
So the last thing I watched was Bob's Burgers. And if Jen met Bob's Burgers, she's a vegetarian because she can talk to animals, so she doesn't eat them. I think she'd be kind of upset that he was cooking a whole bunch of dead cows.
So one of the last books I read was Siren Queen by Nevo. I hope I was pronouncing that correctly. And I think they would get along marvelously, but like also maybe a little too well, you know. I think they would probably actually both get to their goals in a better, bloodier way, like faster than both of the narratives allow them to. So I think that would be really fun. Although I think in that case, you wouldn't end up with the books that we have.
The last show I watched was Stranger Things season 4, part 1, not part 2, so no spoilers. But I really think like if I think about 11 specifically, I think her and Nura would either get into fights all the time or just be best friends, because I think they're both very strong-headed characters and very much willing to, fight for what they want. And if they're on the same page about things, I think they would, walk arm in arm into the sunset. But if they had different opinions about something, they could just spend weeks arguing. So definitely that.
All right. Thank you all so much for the questions. There were so many really, really good ones, but they looked kind of like they'd be very long answers. So entirely like separate panels and for it, even though there were some really fantastic questions. So thank you everyone for the questions, for chatting with us. Thank you so much to the authors for chatting and sending your time on your day with us. And I dropped the giveaway link as well, just in case you didn't see it before. So definitely go and enter that one. And yeah, just thank you everyone. Thank you so much everyone for joining me and joining this fantastic panel. Oh, and I also left bookshop.org links for the books below so that you can buy them and pre-order them, because not all of them are out. So buy them and pre-order them to support everyone here. So I hope everyone has a really great day, and we will, have a really great rest of your waking hours, however long that is for everybody. Bye, everyone.